Welcome back to the Nebraska Football Show. I'm Tim Verghese, joined by Steve Marik. Steve, Nebraska's 3-0. How are we feeling?
I'm feeling good about it. I know a lot of other people around here are feeling good about it, but boy, do we have a really big one on Friday night inside Memorial Stadium, prime time again. Two top 25 teams doing battle inside Memorial. So this is the measuring stick game. As Matt Rule said, the first three games of the season for the Huskers were his preseason, UTEP, Colorado, and then Northern Iowa. Thinks he has a good idea of what he has, but you truly don't really know until you go against somebody like Illinois. So I feel like a lot of people are going to learn a lot of things about this Nebraska team moving forward.
For sure. I think the next stretch of the season is ultimately decided by what we see on Friday night. I
Yep.
think it's a good opportunity for this team to kind of see who they are, play a game out all through all four quarters, and just an opportunity again to get a ranked win for the first time under Matt Rule.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And we can go into it, but Tim, when you look at this game, what are the things that you're really hoping to what's your biggest thing that you want to find out about Nebraska when you're kind of looking at this Husker Illini matchup?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is like I just mentioned, I just want to see them finish out a game. We haven't seen that yet. They haven't actually needed to the first 3 weeks. Like, I've just play through all four quarters, and sit on the ball and so I just want to see what that looks like because for the most part, they haven't really had to play through the middle of the third quarter yet. So I want to see what that looks like when they have to play all four. Can the offense hold up? Can the defense hold up? In what I'm expecting to be a game that I think Nebraska is going to be able to pull away at some point or have that opportunity, but I do think this is going to be closer than the first 3 weeks have looked.
That's a really good point. That's a really good take. And, for me, what I'm really kind of really interested in with this one is how, just to pare it down to the offensive line. I think we know what Nebraska has up there, and I think it looks pretty solid. But, they're going to be without Micah Mazuka, the starting right tackle. So Henry Lutovsky is going to be
The
stepping
right
into,
guard.
oh, right guard. Yeah, my bad. Micah Mazuka out at right guard. And so, now it's time for the next man up, and that next man is Henry Lutovsky, and he's been a spot starter here and there in his career, and it's a big spot right now because the defensive front that Nebraska is going to be going up against and protecting Dylan Raiola against is going to be like anything that they've seen against UTEP, Colorado, and then Northern Iowa. Illinois is just different. They got dudes up there. Seth Coleman, he's the one who ended Casey Thompson's season a few seasons ago with that hand injury, or at least knocked him out for a good chunk of the season. Gabe Jackas, he's a really talented offensive or outside linebacker. Alec Bryant, another outside linebacker. These guys that Nebraska's offensive line are going to be going up against are really good, I think, and they're just going to be different than anything that the Huskers have seen. So I'm really kind of interested in the line of scrimmage and how well Nebraska gets that run game going against these guys, and especially protecting Dylan because to this point, Dylan hasn't really faced an effective and consistent pass rush. We've seen what Dylan can do in a very, very clean pocket. It looks like 7-on-7 football, which is awesome. But what happens when it doesn't look like 7-on-7 football, when real guys are coming after you? That's what I'm really interested to see. I think it's going to go well for Dylan because he handles that stuff very well, especially for somebody his age. But I just want to see it play out with my own eyes and see what happens. So yeah, that's where I'm kind of that's the area that I'm kind of looking at for this game right now.
For sure. And I think it's interesting. You watch Illinois and it's like the interior of that line compared to years past, when they had Jason Newton and just
Yeah.
that interior that they had. The interior looks relatively like smaller than you'd expect, but the edge rushers, and again, like you said, those outside
Hmm.
linebackers and those guys they have coming off the edge, they're
Yeah.
real and they've got real depth there. And yeah, it's going to be a good test for Bryce Better and Turner Corcoran, who have passed the test so far early on this year.
Hmm.
Hasn't necessarily been perfect from either of those guys, but they've held up through the first 3 weeks. But this will be a good test for both of those guys, kind of see how much development have they gone through, where are they at, both of them. So this will be a good test for those guys. Yeah, and then I think defensively, I think we can kind of hop into this like game preview a little bit. I don't know if there's
Sure.
anything coming out of Northern Iowa, I guess, before we get into it. Is there anything from Northern Iowa, I think, that has your attention a couple of days out, or like anything you're circling back on as like either a concern or something that you learned about this team?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, the big thing coming out of the Northern Iowa win was that first half and how Northern Iowa was able to move the ball, especially on the ground against Nebraska's defensive front. It was a little bit odd how well they did that in the first half, but that changed in the second half. I think the halftime speech or the halftime talk that the players had amongst themselves, according to Matt Rule, did some good things, and the physicality ramped up. And at the end of the day, they gave up 3 points. I keep going back to that. It didn't look perfect. Everybody wants everything to look perfect, but it's a third game of the season. It was the first offense that really kind of leaned on the offensive line and leaned on physicality and leaned on the run game, which is not what happened against the spread hot up tempo offenses of Colorado and UTEP. So it was the first look at something Big Ten ish. And, right now they're going to be getting all of the Big Ten ish with Illinois coming into town. But yeah, I mean, it was kind of odd to see, Nebraska's defensive front kind of get moved back at times in that first half against UNI. But you know what? Sometimes things like that are needed. You go back in the film room, you see what things need to get tweaked or changed and things like that, and then you move on. So I'm interested to see how the defensive front kind of rebounds from that game. And again, rebounding sounds weird when you only gave up three points, but that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, the on paper statistics and on paper score does not match what we saw in
No,
person and what we saw
it looked
with our
different to
eyes.
somebody's eyes compared to looking at numbers on a paper.
For sure. And I think going into this week, again, this I'm very curious to see how the defense holds up against an offense that
Hmm.
um is a little different than I expected, I guess, watching Illinois, catching up on what they've done this season. They've got some bodies at running back. Luke Altmaier's taken a good step forward. They've got what helps is they've got some good pass catchers out there, some experienced pass catchers out there for him to
Hmm.
throw to. And those guys are going to be a real good test for Tommy Hill and Marcus Buford and the rest of
Absolutely.
that secondary. I'm curious to see how Nebraska holds up kind of with these guys. Zachary Franklin is a transfer from technically Ole Miss, but his career and really the most production he's had was in those 4 years he had at 3 4 years he had at UTSA. Um, Originally a Texas kid, big long framed receiver, can
Hmm.
run downfield and has just a really good catch radius, a guy you can kind of just throw it up to. So curious to see kind of how. I'm assuming that's who Tommy Hill's going to be on.
Hmm.
But I don't know if Tommy's going to travel with him like he did with Travis, or if he's just going to stick to one side of the field. I'm curious to see if what they do defensively this week. Kind of looking at this Illinois offense, I guess what has your attention? What can Nebraska expose? Potentially, I guess where does Nebraska stack up is the best way to put that.
Yeah, so I think look, going into this game, I think Nebraska is the better team. Now it's something that like I want to see play out in front of my own eyes to kind of, make me feel better about that. So we'll have to wait on that, but things that stand out is just the continuity that Illinois has coming back with Barry Lunny Jr., the offensive coordinator, the play caller. He came from Illinois from UTSA, so there's your Zachary Franklin connection. And I think that's also a good thing for Luke Altmaier, who I think looks better through 3 games. Obviously, Illinois has had the same kind of schedule that Nebraska has, so they haven't really been tested a whole lot, but they did, get the job done against Kansas, their lone power conference or their lone, power conference team that they have played. So anytime you get the offensive coordinator coming back, and the quarterback coming back, I think that's a good thing. Luke Altmaier, he's in his fourth season overall right now. Transfer from Ole Miss, like you said, 6 touchdowns. He's taken really good care of the ball, 0 interceptions. I think he just looks better. And again, he's a mobile guy, and sometimes that can kind of throw a wrench into your defensive plans. He can make things out of nothing. He's that type of guy. He's pretty athletic. And yeah, you mentioned the wide receivers, Tommy Hill and Marcus Buford Jr. I think are going to have their hands full with Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin. Pat Bryant, by the way, 15 catches, 235 yards, 4 touchdowns. So they obviously like Pat Bryant when they get close to the end zone, and why not? 6'3", 200 pounds, big dude. Zachary Franklin, we all know him. He's a 6-year guy. Did a lot of good stuff while playing for Barry Lundy Jr. at UTSA a few seasons ago. So but yeah, going down the line here with the running backs at Illinois, they have some okay ones. Caden Fegan, 6'3", 250 pounds. Tim, I know you have some thoughts on him. He has 173 rushing yards so far and 3 touchdowns. What do you think about him?
Yeah, the Caden, I thought it was interesting too. Like, I really liked him coming out of high school, and when I first heard that Illinois was going to make him a running back, I was a little fascinated by that because I thought he could play a couple different things. I thought like, maybe being like this like hybrid tight end receiver was a potential option for him. Potentially moving to the defensive side was an option. Running back
Yeah.
was something I just didn't see. But then you look at Brett Bielema's background with big backs and just what he
Hmm.
likes to do. I understand. But for a big back, he doesn't run, and maybe it's just like because Derrick Henry has this a little bit too, where it doesn't really look like he's running hard through contact, but then it's Derrick Henry and he is.
Hmm.
But you watch Caden, and I just don't see like a push or like a hammer between the tackles. I see a guy that as soon as he gets into space and he starts to stride out a little bit, I see a guy that can separate downfield and can really create in the open field, but he doesn't run as hard as you think for 6'3", especially considering what Nebraska just saw against Northern Iowa, like 2, 3 backs there that are running hard and running through like lowering their shoulder into contact. You don't really see that from Caden. And I'm curious to see if Nebraska, was able to bring him down a little easier than they were against some of the backs that Northern Iowa had just because of his running style. Like he's a guy that you can chop him low a little bit.
Hmm.
And I actually like early on this season, I kind of like the backs they've got behind him a little bit. Valentine
Yeah.
and
And
the other
Josh
names
McCray.
Josh McCray. Yeah, but I like what I've seen from those two just in terms of being a
Hmm.
true running back that can make guys miss between the tackles, can explode a little bit, and have some shiftiness to him. But Caden's a threat. I think at 6'3", 250 still, like that's a guy that in the passing game is a bit of a mismatch. Like I'm curious who Nebraska stacks up there. Is it going to be Isaac Gifford kind of like coming down over the top and manning up on him? This is a game where you would like to potentially have Javen Wright back for. I'm assuming he's not going to be back for this, but this would be a
Hmm.
game where Javen Wright's a guy that gives you this an opportunity to kind of match up in the pass game against a 6'3" back. Um, but I'm curious to see what Nebraska does there. And I also say this about the running game from what I've seen so far. I Illinois' offensive line has not had the start of the year.
Mm.
Especially again for a Brett Bielema coached unit. They
Yep.
just in the run game they don't get the push you'd expect, and then in pass pro you can kind of get after them. Luke Allmeyer has done a really good job of
Yes.
getting the ball out quick and
Hmm.
making decisive decisions. But you can get after them, and I think Nebraska is going to have this is going to be the best defensive front that this Illinois offensive line has seen,
Hmm.
and and behind that, you've got a potential first round corner in Tommy Hill. You've got Buford who can hold his own, and you've got a secondary and a linebacker room that can fly around. They'll have Jamari Butler back. You're going to see some packages. I think you're going to see Tony White start to open up the playbook a little bit because he hasn't really had to do that the first 3 weeks.
No, he hasn't. Hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I share your thoughts with the offensive line. It doesn't really look like your normal Brett Bielema guys up front. They've allowed 5 sacks, and that's the third most in the Big Ten. So, like you said, Tim, uh, you can get after Illinois a little bit, but the thing is, make sure you're careful about it because Altmaier, his X factor is his legs. He is athletic. He can get out of there and make guys miss and pick up a first down. So that's something always to keep an eye on. Tim, let's shift over to the defense. What have you seen from defensive coordinator Aaron Henry? I really enjoyed Matt Rule's kind of detailed answer about Aaron Henry, Illinois' defensive coordinator. He's a guy who is in his second year as being Brett Bielema's DC at Illinois. He loves to disguise coverages. He'll show man, but he'll play coverage. He'll play like a 2 deep or a 3 deep shell after the snap. That can be a problem for quarterbacks, especially for a young one like Dylan Raiola. But again, Dylan Raiola is not your everyday true freshman quarterback, so we'll see how he adjusts. And the defensive front thing I thought was cool too, with Rule saying it's not just maybe last year it was a lot of bear front where your center and 2 guards are covered and it's like a 5-man line. It's not just that this year. Aaron Henry, the DC, is mixing in some 4-man fronts too, along with the traditional bear front that they always like to play up there in Illinois. So it's going to be really interesting. They Illinois also enters the game with a +8 in the turnover margin, so they have 9 takeaways. The defense has 9 takeaways, 6 interceptions. They've recovered 3 fumbles. This is an aggressive defense that Is going to take chances, and they've had some success taking the ball away from opposing offenses this season.
Yeah, this would be a real good test for both the backs and Dylan, just on taking care of the football, how
Yeah.
well you can do that. I like I said, I really like the edge rusher, the depth they
Hmm.
have there. But along the interior, even with that bare front, I do think because of just the size mismatch, and this is a game again you'd like to have Micah Mizuka for, just because
Sure.
I really do believe with Micah you can build an entire run game of just running behind Ben Scott and Micah and Justin Evans. You can just run along the interior behind those three guys. You don't necessarily get that same consistent push with Henry Lutovsky. That's not to take away from Henry
Yeah.
Lutovsky. I think he can be good and be like, at least hold
Hmm.
his own. But it's just different when Micah's out there. And there's a reason for that. That's a guy that with his head on straight and with everything going right, that's a guy that can play in the NFL potentially as a guard. And so and a very good run blocker. But I do think Nebraska's still going to be able to find some success running the ball, especially down the middle. If you're looking at a unit here that you could potentially circle and be like, okay, Nebraska should be targeting this, it's their linebackers, specifically the inside linebackers. I really like
Hmm.
their secondary. They've got some good depth and some good players out there. Some really talented corners, some really athletic safeties that can kind of move around, do a couple of different things. So this feels like a game where they started to do it a little bit last week with obviously including Carter Nelson, but I think this is a game where it's going to be dictated with what you can do across the middle. Like I don't think Nebraska is going to be able to air it out necessarily deep on them with just straight goes on the outside. I think you're going to have to see Jalen Lloyd and Carter Nelson and Ja'Cory Barney kind of make some plays across the middle of the field. Neor and Banks as well. But I think you've got to see plays along the middle. I think that's where this game is decided, is Nebraska being able to run up the middle and being able to throw across the middle.
Last year, Illinois is starting inside linebacker Dylan Rosiek. He had a rough game against Nebraska last year. I think that's another area that Tim, I totally agree with you. I think that's an area that you attack. You
And
attack Dylan
you watch
Rosiek.
them early on this year, and that's the one unit where I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
they're not doing their part in
It
this
doesn't look
unit.
like
Like,
the D line. It doesn't look like the defensive
mhm.
backs. The linebackers at second level Illinois just doesn't look as good as the front and then the back end. So I totally agree with you. Middle of the field, that's some potential for Janiron Bonner, Thomas Fedoni, Nate Borkacher, Carter Nelson, like you said. So there's a lot of opportunity in that middle of the field for sure.
Yeah, I think this is the type of game too where like Satterfield's been trying to spread them wide early on and then try and throw across the middle. I think this is the game where that's a little more effective, where some of those like trying to stretch them horizontally kind of helps you down the line and makes you account for that. And this could be a game. We've been waiting for it all year. They've been high on Thomas Fedoni coming into the year. We haven't really seen him do a whole lot this year. Kind of been relatively pedestrian so far this year. Maybe this is the game where he starts to get used a little more, where they kind of take advantage of his size in the middle. Nate Borkshire as well. And like you said, even Bonner, like that's a guy that is in the starting lineup for a reason.
Mhm.
Carter's obviously climbing up and closing in on that starting slot role. But there's a reason Bonner's up there, and I do wonder if this is the type of game where you start to see him featured a little more. But at the same time, I do think like this is a game where you can kind of rely on, like in week one, you kind of rely on the run game to set up the pass. You kind of rely on Dante and Ramir and Emmett to kind of set things up for Dylan on second and third down,
Mhm.
rather than having to rely on Dylan to kind of move the ball. I don't think this is going to be one of those games. I think this is a game where Dylan can kind of pick his spots where he wants to be able to do some things. And this is a game where you can get them on play action. You kind of showed you can get them on play action. And I'll throw a take out there too, just because and this is not even a thing on Dylan. It's more of just what I believe about the regression Jalen Daniels has had. I think he's going to be the best quarterback that Illinois defense has faced this year.
Yeah.
The only other one would be Jalen Daniels, but Jalen's regressed a good bit, just coming off injuries and doesn't
I
have
don't
the
think he
same
looked
juice he
good.
once did.
I think
Yeah,
he
he
was trying to
struggled.
do too much. He was trying to. I got a bad vibe, so I was watching the game and I saw Jalen Daniels trot out first play, and he was like walking slow. He was like doing his pray thing. He was like looking up to the sky, and I'm like, dude, the play clock is at 5 seconds. Let's go, let's go. And so they had to snap it real quick, and it got tipped at the line. It just was not a good start. And from that moment on, I was like, uh, Daniels is. I just didn't get a good vibe from that game, and I totally agree with you, Tim. Dylan Raiola is going to be the best quarterback that Illinois has faced this far for sure.
Yeah. I looking at this defense for you, anything that sticks out specifically with the secondary and anything you're really looking for that Nebraska could potentially expose here?
Two guys stood out to me with Illinois' defense. This is kind of their Isaac Gifford-esque rover, big bodied safety guy, Matthew Bailey. He's a third year guy, 6'2", 215 pounds, flies around, solid tackler. I really like him. Kind of shaky in pass coverage, so maybe that's something that Marcus Satterfield takes advantage. But then also Xavier Scott. I mean, Xavier Scott is just a playmaker. I really like watching him. So he's a safety, 5'11", 190 pounds. He leads he's second in the team, I think, in tackles with 12. He already has 3 interceptions on this season, and 2 of them came against Kansas. He was really doing well against Jalen Daniels. And they didn't really have an answer for Xavier Scott. So, like I said, Illinois has got some guys in the defensive backfield. They always kind of do over there. So, yeah, maybe attack somebody like Matthew Bailey more than somebody like Xavier Scott. But again, every time I say that, I think to myself like, hey, Matt Rule is very clearly not holding back. And they want to be aggressive with Dylan Raiola and take their shots, and because they think they have the best quarterback, um, you know, maybe in the conference. But so
Are we
it's
there
something
yet?
that
Are
no,
we?
I want to take that back. Maybe we should edit
Yeah.
that out. I'm just talking, but they think they have a really good quarterback and somebody who can execute what they want to do and continue to be aggressive. So that's something that I'm going to be interested in too, is kind of what they do with Matthew Bailey, that big bodied safety, and then maybe if they stay away from Xavier Scott because he seems like he's really
Yeah.
good at getting the ball.
Scott's the type of DB I love. This is scrappy
Yeah.
little dude, like not even
Oh yeah.
little, but like a sub 6 foot dude, but really scrappy, can hold his own in coverage, come up and run support. That's the type of DB I love watching those guys that play bigger than they are and just like play with that chip on their shoulder. I will
Mhm.
say something I think that's caught my eye a little bit and something Nebraska has now, which they didn't last year. Team speed, specifically team downfield speed. I wonder if Nebraska can get him because there was a couple times against Kansas where Kansas guys are running open deep. Jalen just can't get the ball there. And I wonder a little bit. It's like, okay, you've got Neor and you've got Barney and you've got Lloyd specifically. Those guys running
Mhm.
downfield with Banks across the middle or Carter and Fedoni across the middle. You can stretch the field a little bit. We haven't seen Isaiah Neor really go deep yet since that first
Not
game.
yet. Not yet.
Um,
Those counters to what Satterfield has shown on film, they're going to come out once Big Ten play starts. So
for
I'm
sure,
I'm I'm thinking there's going to be a lot more down the field opportunities for those guys like Banks and Nayor.
for
Maybe
sure.
maybe even Fedoni too. If you put on tape that he's doing all these east west routes and all of a sudden he starts out going east west, but then he like shoots up the field, that's going to be a counter. And again, and we already talked about how the middle of
Yeah,
the
at
field
some
could
point, I
be
think we're going to see a Thomas
vulnerable.
Fidone wheel route. We're going to see something where he baits the corner to staying flat
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
turns upfield.
yeah.
I think we're going to see that at some point. That it feels like they're trying to set that up.
Definitely feels
And
like they're trying to set that up.
yeah, and again, Dylan and Jalen Lloyd have been trying to get that connection together. They're working on it. They've said they've been able to hit and practice in both. I think it was cool to see both take ownership for that interception on Saturday. Dylan's first. Dylan taking ownership for the ball he threw, saying he could have just like let that go a little further and let Jalen run under it rather than trying to float it up to him. And Jalen on his end felt like he was like I should have gone up for it. I should have just had a little more focus there. But good to see both guys, both young guys taking ownership like that. That's leadership you like to see. And but I
Yeah,
want to see if those two can hit on one of those deep shots eventually.
deep shots, and I think it really irritated Dylan that how his last two throws on the offense's 2 minute drill against UNI, because they were not good throws from Dylan Raiola. The first was a back shoulder attempt to Nayor along the sideline, and it didn't have enough zip. It was just kind of lofted over and fell a few yards short of where Isaiah ended up. And you could tell after the play that Dylan was disappointed in himself. He pointed at himself, said, "That's on me." But then that 4th and 3 play where they call a timeout to Satterfield and Glenn Thomas and Rule to talk about it. So they come out, they go for it, which I like because there was no threat of losing that game. So what better way to practice this situation than to go and do it on the field in a real game? And then Dylan Raiola, it was kind of a lazy attempt. His feet wasn't set. He was kind of moving to the right, throwing over the middle of the field. It was behind Janiron Bonner, who slipped. I know he slipped, but he had regained himself, his balance, and with a good accurate throw, that would have been a first down completion, and then you would have continued on with the 2 minute drill and maybe have gone 3 for 3 to start the season. But it didn't happen, and it was kind of a lazy attempt from Dylan. So I think those two throws, those two inaccurate throws from Dylan in that last 2 minute drill against UNI really maybe stuck with him. And I'm excited to see how he reacts to that and responds to that, because, it's been a lot. There's been a lot of good stuff to talk about with Dylan Raiola, but those two throws kind of stood out to me. And I think he didn't like his execution on those two throws. So we'll see.
For sure. Yeah. And again, part of it too, you have to think again against that team specifically and the score it was already at that point. Like Nebraska's not really trying there at that point in the game. Not necessarily trying, but like they're not 100% locked in. And I think you're going to see 100% locked in for all 4 quarters this week and moving forward just with some of the opponents ahead on the schedule. I guess for me, I guess, and we're going into this and kind of close out with this. What do you want to see? Like, I guess what questions do you still want to see answered? What questions do you think can get answered on Friday?
The offensive line's push in the run game, and then their protection against Dylan Riley, because that's where Nebraska's season is gonna be dictated. Can you protect Dylan? And because if you do that, the downfield throw game is always going to be there with Dylan and everything. So when this is the first test that Nebraska's offensive line is going to get a real test with some dudes up there. We've already mentioned them, the outside linebackers. There's three of them that are probably going to be in the NFL. Seth Coleman, Gabe Jackas, and then Alec Bryant, who, by the way, is from Shadow Creek High School in Texas. Shout out to Braylon Prude, current Husker true freshman, and then Iris Savage Lewis, the GA, who did some coaching over there at Shadow Creek. So, the offensive line is where my eyes are going to be, the line of scrimmage. How well does Nebraska get that run game going against a Big Ten-esque, a Big Ten defensive front, and then how well do they protect Dylan, and how does Dylan react to the pass rush that I'm assuming is going to be, consistently, maybe not in his face, but we'll just see. We haven't seen a pass rush really kind of get to Dylan, and maybe Illinois is going to do it, and I'm excited to see Nebraska's quarterback handle it and see what he does with it.
Yeah. I kind of trust Dylan against Pat, like just going back to Buford and going back to his high school tape and what we've seen early on in pressure situations against Colorado. He had a couple of those, even against Northern Iowa, he had a couple of those.
Mm-hmm.
Just
And
going
even
up.
against UTEP,
Yes, yeah.
the touchdown pass to Isaiah Nayor, he had a guy right in his face. So
Right.
he's
Yeah.
already kind of
And
shown it all
like,
over.
Westmoreland was quiet, but there were a couple of reps where
Yeah.
Westmoreland was getting after him and he had to step up in the pocket. So he
Mhm.
kind of does it with ease. So you don't even really think about it because he
He
just
does
kind
so
of,
much with ease that makes me think, is he okay? Are you trying fully Dylan Raiola right
right.
now, or are you just that smooth? And he might be that smooth, but we'll find out more against Big Ten defenses.
Right, exactly. But yeah, I wonder a little bit because we saw that last week, but I wonder a little bit, because this is a team that's going to get pressure off the edge. We see
Yeah.
Dylan stepping up a little bit. We see a couple scrambles. We saw one big one the last few
Mhm.
weeks, but we want to see if we see a little more of him just in the run game, being able to create a little bit with his legs, force defenses to account for that. Because this is a team that can go 4 or 5 wide at this point, and it's like, okay, if all else fails, Dylan scramble, and
Mhm.
they can kind of do that, which they haven't really been able to do in a while, where you have to account for every single pass catcher and the quarterback as a run threat.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, last week against Northern Iowa, Dylan, I think it was 10 different receivers he had a completion to. I mean, they've been spread it out. I
yeah,
think Satterfield's been doing a really good job designing plays and getting different guys involved. And of course, Dylan, when he has protection, he's shown that he can just watch his head like go to the right, to the center, to the left. I mean, he's going through his progressions really well, and he's finding different guys. So it's been cool to watch.
yeah. Real quick, I guess one quick Nebraska thing before we get out of here, I wanted to touch on real quick. How do we feel about the Heinrich package? We've seen it a couple times now. We have an idea of what they want to do. I think they're trying to they're not set something up, but like it's something that
Mm-hmm.
could work eventually. I feel like they rep it so much in practice, it feels like. And again, there's a look there that you can get where if you get the defensive look, it can break open for a huge play. But right now, it just hasn't been super fruitful. Do you want to see them keep trying it, or do you just want to see them wait and pull it out when they need something different?
I'm going to get yelled at from the fan base or anybody who watches this because I am a fan of them doing some sort of Heinrich Harburg package because I'm in total agreement with Matt Rule on why they're doing it. It's because they want to give the opposing defensive coordinators an extra 20 to 30 minutes to just like watch it, try to figure out, okay, we want to do this when he is right here and we want to do that when he is over there on the field with Dylan at the same time. I think that's very beneficial. I think that is something that kind of gives a headache to defensive coordinators and just adds another thing on to practice that they have to be prepared for. And if they aren't buttoned up, if the defense is not buttoned up in what they want to do when Heinrich Harburg is on the field, whether he's at receiver, offline tight end, or maybe even the backfield at running back, which we've already seen, if they're not buttoned up in their alignment and showing, exactly what they want to do, I think Nebraska's offense and I think Satterfield is clever enough to take advantage of that. And I know it hasn't been successful to this point, but again, it's early in the season. They're putting it on tape so everybody can just be aware of it. And then later in the season, perhaps the counters come out and we start seeing some more success with it. So I don't know about you, Tim. I like Heinrich Harburg's just being inserted into the lineup and doing some different things. I think it creates headaches for opposing defenses, and I think it'll be successful later on this season.
No, I completely agree. Just literally for the same reason of just like again, it's mind games. You're forcing defenses and
Exactly.
defensive coordinators to have to account for it. It's something that like again, like you're saying, like literally counters. Like right now, they I think
Sure.
primarily all the Heinrich runs have been this like QB follow, QB lead type, where it's basically just power
Hmm.
with the quarterback. At some point, you pull out counter. That's not been on film yet. Like that's something
Yeah.
that would catch a defense off guard, catch a front
Hmm.
off guard.
Yes.
We've seen him line up out wide. We're gonna see a double pass at some point. We're going
We're
to
gonna
see a
see a
double
pop
pass.
pass, I think. I
Yeah,
mean, he's gonna take a snap. They're gonna shift Dylan out to out wide as a receiver like they did earlier. He's gonna take the snap. He's gonna act like he's gonna be doing a QB counter run. He's gonna be following two pullers. Then all of a sudden he's gonna jump up and throw a touchdown to Thomas Fidone or Nate Borkature over the middle of the field. I just know that's coming, and I think that's something that is going to be worth it right now because I know fans don't want to take the ball out of Dylan Raiola's hands, and that's fine and everything. But I still think Heinrich Harburg can do things, and I still think it can benefit the team by putting something like that on film for the opponents to just prepare extra for.
for sure. Yeah, and again, it's all coaching. It is more of just a mind game, and I understand the frustration of like, hey, this hasn't worked yet. There's a couple things
Yeah,
that haven't
I
worked
get it.
yet
I
that I
totally
think
get it.
there's a couple things that haven't worked yet that I think eventually, like again, they keep trying that flat to Thomas Fidone with the receivers blocking, and it's like okay, they keep trying that. There's a reason for that. Again, that's trying to stretch him horizontally. You're going to get a look off of that eventually.
He's
You're
going to
going to be
turn
able
up
to.
field one of these days, and he's going to be wide open.
Yep, I'm sure, right? It has to
Yeah,
happen, right? Like
yeah, he's
maybe this
got
is just
to.
me just wishful thinking, just being like, okay, it's got to work at some point. Like there's a reason they
Hmm.
keep doing it.
Yeah,
But no, there's a couple things they're doing definitely offensively right now where it's like, okay, this isn't effective right now, but eventually it will be, and there's a reason they're doing what they're doing for a lot of this. Some of the play action looks, you see some things where they run and then like the Jalen Lloyd, like the jet sweep that goes into um or the fake jet sweep that goes into that deep route. You're going to see a look off of that. You're going to see a tight end leak off of that at some point. You're going to see like they're going to build. You can build things
not even a
outside of
handoff. I
that.
mean, just give it to
Right.
Jalen and let him go. I mean, that's how Janiron Bonner scored his touchdown last year against Maryland, I believe. He was doing that same jet motion, pre-snap jet motion, where he's taking off right before the snap. And it obviously it's meant to mess with linebackers' eyes and get them shifting over a gap. Then you run it the other way. But one of these days, I mean, Jalen Lloyd is in that position. He's going to get a handoff and he's going to walk into the end zone because he has a full head of steam and he's got track speed and he's just going to outrun everybody to the edge. That's coming for sure. But yeah, I mean, the thing with these things is you just have to set them up. You need to show them and keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And once that defense starts cheating, then call that counter and then you're walking into the end zone with a touchdown. So I'm excited to see all that. Maybe we get it this Friday night. Who knows? Maybe it's safer later in the season, but it's coming.
Yeah, for sure. And that the orbit return they're doing with Jalen too. They do that with Jalen and
Yeah.
Ja'Cory.
Hmm.
But seeing that again, like just having these motion things where it forces again the defense to just account for that. Like as
They
soon
need to
as
be
they see
buttoned up.
Yep. As soon as they see Jalen and Ja'Cory in motion, it's like, okay, is this guy going to stop in the backfield and return on this orbit? Is he
Hmm.
going to get a handoff on a jet, or is he just going to keep running through? Because either way, you forcing that linebacker or whoever's on him, that slot corner, whoever's on them to account for that and pause for just a second to see what they're doing. Both those guys are fast enough where they can take advantage of that slight hesitation they make the linebackers do and take it and like make a play out of it. So curious to see kind of how that continues to develop, how that continues to establish. But again, like I mean, we said it last week, saying it again, baby steps. Like this team is taking baby steps forward. They're putting things on film right now. And the way this whole staff talks, they're very confident in the game plans they have. And
They sound so confident. I think Matt Rule knows he has a good football team. I mean,
yeah,
he's doing his
there's
best head coaching job up at the podium and saying all the right things. But inside the walls, I think everybody knows that they got a legit team.
just look at the way they're talking this year versus last year. And
Yeah.
again, like this year
Yeah.
where like from a fan base perspective and from an outsider's perspective, you're looking down and you're like, okay, well, they won by 31 points, but there's some concerns here, here, here. And then you listen to them talk like we said it in the game, like, oh man, Matt Rule's going to be pissed when he get to the press
Yeah.
conference, and he was
Yeah.
fine. He was just like,
Yeah,
yeah,
he was
we
fine.
handle business, and
Hmm. It was
I just
preseason game.
right, and that's the thing. Like, and again, I'm not, I may just end this here with this, but it is. I've seen Colorado fans act like that game was Nebraska's Super Bowl for some reason,
They always
and
love to
it's
say that. Yeah.
and then you see the way Matt Rule and the team talks about it. It's like, yeah, I mean the preseason's over, the real season starts now. That's all it was. That's all that game was. That's all that
Mhm.
it ever like win or lose. It didn't really matter for Nebraska's season. It wasn't really going to impact Nebraska's season. But they won. It is what it is,
Man,
and
fans might come after you for that take, Tim.
I listen. It is what it is.
It's a
I've
non-conference game. It was more for the fans than the big picture for Nebraska
listen.
football.
Yeah,
That's all it
exactly, and I
was.
get it. But like
It was a
again, and I've I've
rivalry. That's
I've
all
said it
right.
before. That's not a good team they played. That's not a good team they
No,
beat. That's a team with
UTEP's not
really
going to
good
be good.
players. Yep,
UTEP is
UTEP's not going to be
winless.
like they haven't
Colorado's not
played
going to
any
be
good
good.
teams yet.
No, they have not. Illinois is the
So
test. Illinois is
we'll
a
find
measuring
it.
stick game.
We'll find out about this team on Friday night. And so outside of that, I guess Steve, we get the Saturday off. Anything you're excited to watch on Saturday when we have this kind of Saturday? Just watch the full college football slate. It's not the best slate, but it's a solid one.
I can find joy in every single college football game. So I mean, there's obviously going to be a ton. I have not looked at the schedule or anything
USC Michigan
like
has
that.
my attention. I feel like we learned a lot about both teams and where they stack up in the conference this week.
Sure.
That's one for me. I believe that's this weekend, isn't it? That is this weekend.
Yeah, looks like we got okay. So if you want some ACC action, NC State at Clemson and everything, but I mean, yeah, USC Michigan 2:30 Saturday, top 20 matchup. Who we got going on here? Iowa is at Minnesota. Iowa is at Minnesota.
Learn a little
Kansas
bit
State.
more about them.
Yep. Kansas State BYU is going to be juicy. Purdue at Oregon State. Michigan State goes to Boston College. Going to learn more about Michigan State right there and get the nice win over Maryland. And now they have to go do it against Boston College. So Michigan State's getting some early tests right now.
Yeah. They've been good though. I've been impressed. I guess like we can head out of here and just wait for another thing. But
Yeah,
Michigan State and Indiana got my eyes on that both those
for
staffs. I
sure.
really like what they've done early on this year.
Indiana's got a lot of new faces, and they seem like they play hard for Kirk Cignetti, and he's a fun guy to root for, in my opinion. So
I'm really
Indiana
excited
is
for that matchup. I'm really excited
looking
for that
good.
preview and that matchup.
Sure, absolutely.
For sure. But that'll do it for us with the Nebraska Football Show. We'll be back next week with another episode. Stay tuned over at Inside Nebraska. Be sure to like and subscribe this video. And like we said, we'll be back next week.